Battles are always hot, even in the snow. Sweat heat, blood heat. Only death is cool. Slope of the mountain. Only place didn't stink of death. Had to get away from smell of it, sight of it. Heard a baby cry. The women fight alongside the men, sometimes. But why they had let her come, I don't... Gave birth there alone, before she died of her wounds. Covered the child with her cloak, but the wind blown the cloak away. Child blew with the cold. Should have been dead too, crying there. Crying in the snow. I couldn't just leave a child. No children of our own. Always knew you wanted children. I knew you'd take it to your heart, Kari. Yes, lass. Rand is a good name. A good name. Suddenly, Rand's legs lost the little strength they had. Stumbling, he fell to his knees. Tam moaned with the jolt, and the strip of blanket cut into Rand's shoulders, but he was not aware of either. If a Trolloc had leaped up in front of him right then, he would have just stared at it. He looked over his shoulder at Tam, who had sunk back into wordless murmurs. Sully, fevers always brought bad dreams, and this was a night for nightmares, even without a fever. "You are my father," he said aloud, stretching back his hand to touch Tam. "And I am..." The fever was worse, much worse. Grimly, he struggled to his feet. Tam murmured something, but Rand refused to listen to anymore. Throwing his weight against the improvised harness, he tried to put all of his mind into taking one leaden step after another, into reaching the safety of Emond's Field. But he could not stop the echo in the back of his mind. He's my father. It was just a fever dream. He's my father. It was just a fever dream. Light. Who am I? Chapter 7. Out of the Woods. Gray first light came while Rand still trudged through the forest. At first, he did not really see. When he finally did, he stared at the fading darkness in surprise. No matter what his eyes told him, he could hardly believe he had spent all night trying to travel the distance from the farm to Emond's Field. Of course, the quarry road by day, rocks and all, was a far cry from the woods by night. On the other hand, it seemed days since he had seen the black-cloaked rider on the road, weeks since he and Tam had gone in for their supper. He no longer felt the strip of cloth digging into his shoulders, but then he felt nothing in his shoulders except numbness, nor in his feet, for that matter. In between, it was another matter. His breath came in labored pants that had long since set his throat and lungs to burning. Hunger twisted his stomach into queasy sickness. Tam had fallen silent some time before. Rand was not sure how long it had been since the murmurs had ceased, but he did not dare halt now to check on Tam. If he stopped, he would never be able to force himself to start out again. Anyway, whatever Tam's condition, he could do nothing beyond what he was doing. The only hope lay ahead in the village. He tried wearily to increase his pace, but his wooden legs continued their slow plod. He barely even noticed the cold or the wind. Vaguely, he caught the smell of wood smoke. At least he was almost there if he could smell the village chimneys. A tired smile had only begun on his face, though, when it turned to a frown. Smoke lay heavy in the air. Too heavy. With the weather, a fire might well be blazing away on every hearth in the village, but the smoke was still too strong. In his mind, he saw again the Trollocs on the road. Trollocs coming from the east, in the direction of Emond's Field. He peered ahead, trying to make out the first houses, ready to shout for help at the first sight of anyone, even send Bowie at one of the Coplans. A small voice in the back of his head told him to hope someone there could still give help. Suddenly, a house became visible through the last bare-branched trees, and it was all he could do to keep his feet moving. Hope turning to sharp despair, he staggered into the village. Charred piles of rubble stood in the places of half the houses of Emond's Field. Soot-coated brick chimneys thrust like dirty fingers from heaps of blackened timbers. Thin wisps of smoke still rose from the ruins. Grimy-faced villagers, some yet in their night clothes, poked through the ashes, here pulling free a cookpot, there simply prodding forlornly at the wreckage with a stick. What little had been rescued from the flames dotted the streets. Tall mirrors and polished sideboards and high chests stood in the dust among chairs and tables, buried under bedding and cooking utensils, meager piles of clothing and personal belongings. The destruction seemed scattered at random through the village. 5 houses marched untouched in one row, while in another place, a lone survivor stood surrounded by desolation. On the far side of the Whinstone Water, 3 huge Beltane bonfires roared, tended by a cluster of men. Thick columns of black smoke bent northward with the wind, flecked by careless sparks. One of Master Alvir's Buren stallions was dragging something Rand could not make out over the ground toward the wagon bridge and the flames. Before he was well out of the trees, a sooty-faced Harald Luhan hurried to it, clutching the woodsman's axe in one thick-fingered hand. The burly blacksmith's ash-smeared nightshirt bumped his boots. The angry red welt of a burn across his chest, showing through a ragged tear. He dropped to one knee beside the litter. Sam's eyes were closed, and his breathing came low and hard. "Frolics, boy?" asked in a smoke-hoarse voice. "Here, too. Here, too. Well, we may have been luckier than anyone in the right to be. He's been credited. He needs the wisdom. Now, where in the light is she? Egwene!" Egwene, running by with her arms full of bedsheets torn into bandages, looked around at them without slowing. Her eyes stared at something in the far distance. Dark circles made them appear even larger than they actually were. Then she saw Rand and stopped, drawing a shuddering breath. "Oh no, Rand! Not your father! Is he... Come, I'll take you to Nynaeve." Rand was too tired, too stunned to speak. All through the night, Emond's Field had been a haven where he and Tam would be safe. Now all he could seem to do was stare in dismay at her smoke-stained dress. He noticed odd details as if they were very important. The buttons down the back of her dress were done up crookedly, and her hands were clean. He wondered why her hands were clean when smudges of soot marked her cheeks.
Any trace
Master
of the
Luhan
Lassie?
seemed to understand what had come over him. Laying his axe across the shafts, the blacksmith picked up the rear of the litter and gave it a gentle push, prodding him to follow it. He stumbled after her as if walking in his sleep. Briefly, he wondered how Master Luhan knew the creatures were Trollocs, but it was a fleeting thought. If Tam could recognize them, there was no reason why Harald Luhan could not. "All the stories are right," he muttered. "So it seems, lad," the blacksmith said. "So it seems." Rand only half heard. He was concentrating on following Egwene's slender shape. He had pulled himself together just enough to wish he would hurry, though in truth, she was keeping her pace to what the two men could manage with their burden. She led them halfway down the green to the Calder house. Char blackened the edges of its thatch, and smut stained the whitewashed walls. Of the houses on either side, only the foundation stones were left, and two piles of ash and burned timbers. One had been the house of Baron Thane, one of the Miller's brothers. The other had been Abel Coffin's, Matt's father. Even the chimneys had toppled. "Wait here," Egwene said, and gave them a look as if expecting an answer. When they only stood there, she muttered something under her breath, then dashed inside. "Matt?" Rand said. "Is he?" "He's alive," the blacksmith said. He set down his end of the litter and straightened slowly. "I saw him only a little while ago. It's a wonder any of us are alive. The way they came after my house in the forge, you'd have thought I had gold and jewels in there. All's but cracked one's skull with a frying pan. She took one look at the ashes of our house this morning and set out hunting around the village with the biggest hammer she could dig out of what's left of the forge, just in case any of them hid instead of running away. I could almost pity the thing if she finds one." He nodded to the Calder house. "Mistress Calder and a few others took in some of those who were hurt. The ones with no home of their own still standing. When the Wisdom's seen Tam, we'll find him a bed. The inn, maybe. The mayor offered it already. But Nynaeve said the hurt folk would heal better if there weren't so many of them together." Rand sank to his knees. Shrugging out of his blanket harness, he wearily busied himself with checking Tam's covers. Tam never moved or made a sound, even when Rand's wooden hands jostled him. But he was still breathing, at least. My father. The other was just the fever talking. "What if they come back?" he said dully. "The wheel weaves as the wheel wills," Master Luhan said uneasily. "If they come back, well, they're gone now. So we pick up the pieces, build up what's been torn down." He sighed, his face going slack as he knuckled the small of his back. For the first time, Rand realized that the heavy-set man was as tired as he was himself, if not more so. The blacksmith looked at the village, shaking his head. "I don't suppose today will be much of a Beltane, but we'll make it through. We always have." Abruptly, he took up his axe, and his face firmed. "There's work waiting for me. Don't you worry, lad. The wisdom will take good care of him, and the light will take care of us all. And if the light doesn't, well, we'll just take care of ourselves. Remember, we're Two Rivers folk. Still on his knees, Rand looked at the village as the blacksmith walked away. Really looked for the first time. Master Luhan was right, he thought, and was surprised that he was not surprised by what he saw. People still dug in the ruins of their homes, but even in the short time he had been there, more of them had begun to move with a sense of purpose. He could almost feel the growing determination. But, he wondered, they had seen Trollocs. Had they seen the black-cloaked rider? Had they felt his hatred? Nynaeve and Egwene appeared from the Calder house, and he sprang to his feet. Or rather, he tried to spring to his feet. It was more of a stumbling lurch that almost put him on his face in the dust. The Wisdom dropped to her knees beside the litter without giving him so much as a glance. Her face and dress were even dirtier than Egwene's, and the same dark circles lined her eyes, though her hands too were clean. She felt Tam's face and thumbed open his eyelids. With a frown, she pulled down the coverings and eased the bandage aside to look at the wound. Before Rand could see what lay underneath, she had replaced the wadded cloth. Sighing, she smoothed the blanket and cloak back up to Tam's neck with a gentle touch, as if tucking a child in for the night. "There's nothing I can do," she said. She had to put her hands on her knees to straighten up. "I'm sorry, Rand." For a moment he stood not understanding as he started back to the house. Then he stumbled after her and pulled her around to face him. "He's dying," he cried. "I know," she said simply, and he sagged with the matter-of-factness of it. "You have to do something. You have to. You're the Wisdom." Pain twisted her face, but only for an instant. Then she was all hollow-eyed resolve again, her voice emotionless and firm. "Yes, I am. I know what I can do with my medicines, and I know when it's too late. Don't you think I would do something if I could? But I can't. I can't, Rand. And there are others who need me. People I can help." "I brought him to you as quickly as I could," he mumbled. Even with the village in ruins, there had been the wisdom for hope. With that gone, he was empty. "I know you did," she said gently. She touched his cheek with her hand. "It isn't your fault. You did the best anyone could. I am sorry, Rand, but I have others to tend to.
Which way do we go?
Our troubles are just beginning, I'm afraid." Vacantly, he stared after her until the door of the house closed behind her. He could not make any thought come, except that she would not help. Suddenly, he was knocked back a step as Egwene cannoned into him, throwing her arms around him. Her hug was hard enough to bring a grudge from him any other time. Now he only looked silently at the door behind which his hopes had vanished. "I'm so sorry, Rand," she said against his chest. "I wish there was something I could do." Numbly, he put his arms around her. "I know.
Here!
I have to do something, Egwene. I don't know what, but I can't just let it." His voice broke, and she hugged him harder. "Egwene!" At Nynaeve shot from the house, Egwene jumped. "Egwene, I need you! And wash your hands again!" She pushed herself free from Rand's arms. "She needs my help, Rand." "Egwene!" He thought he heard a sob as she spun away from him. Then she was gone, and he was left alone beside the litter. For a moment he looked down at Tam, feeling nothing but hollow helplessness. Suddenly his face hardened. "The mayor will know what to do," he said, lifting the shafts once more. "The mayor will know." Bran al'Vir always knew what to do. With weary obstinacy, he set out for the wine spring inn. Another of the Buren stallions passed him, its harness straps tied around the ankles of a big shape, draped with a dirty blanket. Arms covered with coarse hair dragged in the dirt behind the blanket, and one corner was pushed up to reveal a goat's horn. The Two Rivers was no place for stories to become horribly real. If Trollocs belonged anywhere, it was in the world outside, for places where they had Aes Sedai and false dragons, and the light alone knew what else come to life out of the tales of Gleeman. Not the Two Rivers, not Emond's Field. As he made his way down the green, people called to him, some from the ruins of their homes, asking if they could help. He heard them only as murmurs in the background, even when they walked alongside him for a distance as they spoke. Without really thinking about it, he managed words that said he needed no help, that everything was being taken care of. When they left him, with worried looks and sometimes a comment about sending Nynaeve to him, he noticed that just as little. All he let himself be aware of was the purpose he had fixed in his head. had taken half the village. A few scorch marks marred its walls, but the red roof tiles glittered in the sunlight as brightly as ever. All that was left of the peddler's wagon, though, blackened iron wheel rims leaning against the charred wagon box, now on the ground. The big round hoops that had held up the canvas cover slanted crazily, each at a different angle. Tom Maryland sat cross-legged on the old foundation stones, carefully snipping singed edges from the patches on his cloak with a pair of small scissors. He set down cloak and scissors when Rand drew near. Without asking if Rand needed or wanted help, he hopped down and picked up the back of the litter.
Inside? Of course. Don't you worry, boy. Your wisdom will take care of him. I've watched her work since last night, and she has a deft touch and a sure skill. It could be a lot worse. Some died last night. Not many, perhaps, but any at all are too many for me. Old Fane just disappeared, and that's the worst of all. Trollocs will eat anything. You should thank the light your father is still here, and alive for the wisdom to heal.
Rand blotted out the words, "He is my father," producing a voiced meaningless sound that he noticed no more than a blind buzzing. He could not bear any more sympathy, any more attempts to boost his spirit. Not now. Not until Bran Alvear told him how to help Tam. Suddenly he found himself facing something scrawled on the inn door. A curving line scratched with a charred stick. A charcoal teardrop balanced on its point. So much had happened that it hardly surprised him to find the dragon's fang marked on the door of the Winespring Inn. Why anyone would want to accuse the innkeeper or his family of evil, or bring the inn bad luck, was beyond him. But the night had convinced him of one thing. Anything was possible. Anything at all. At a push from the Gleeman, he lifted the latch and went in. The common room was empty except for Bran Alvear. And cold, too, for no one had found time to lay a fire. The mayor sat at one of the tables, dipping his pen in an inkwell with a frown of concentration on his face, and his gray-fringed head bent over his parchment. Nightshirt tucked hastily into his trousers. Bagging around his considerable waist, he absently scratched at one bare foot and toes of the other. His feet were dirty, as if he had been outside more than once without bothering about boots, despite the cold.
What's your trouble?
He demanded without looking up.
Be quick with it. I have 24 things to do right this minute, and more that should have been done an hour ago. So I have little time or patience. Well, out with it.
Master Alvear, Rand said. It's my father. The mayor's head jerked up.
Rand! Tam!
He threw down the pen and knocked over his chair as he leaped up.
Perhaps the light hasn't abandoned us altogether. I was afraid you were both dead. Bella galloped into the village an hour after the Trollocs left, lathered and blowing as if she'd run all the way from the farm. And I thought, no time for that now. We'll take him upstairs.
He seized the rear of the litter, shouldering the Gleeman out of the way.
You go get the wisdom, Master Maryland, and tell her I said hurry, or I'll know the reason why. Rest easy, Tam. We'll soon have you in a good soft bed. Go, Gleeman, go!
Tom Maryland vanished through the doorway before Rand could speak. Nynaeve wouldn't do anything. She said she couldn't help him. I knew. I hoped you'd think of something. Master Alvear looked at Tam more sharply, then shook his head.
We'll see, boy. We'll see.
But he no longer sounded confident.
Let's get him into a bed. He can rest easy, at least.
Rand let himself be prodded toward the stairs at the back of the common room. He tried hard to keep his certainty that somehow Tam would be all right. But it had been thin to begin with, he realized, and the sudden doubt in the mayor's voice shook him. On the second floor of the inn, at the front, were half a dozen snug, well-appointed rooms with windows overlooking the green. Mostly they were used by the peddlers, or people down from Watch Hill or up from Devon Ride. But the merchants who came each year were often surprised to find such comfortable rooms. 3 of them were taken now, and the mayor hurried Rand to one of the unused ones. Quickly, the down comforter and blankets were stripped back on the wide bed, and Tam was transferred to the thick feather mattress with goose-down pillows tucked under his head. He made no sound beyond hoarse breathing as he was moved, not even a groan, but the mayor brushed away Rand's concern, telling him to set a fire to take the chill off the room. While Rand dug wood and kindling from the wood box next to the fireplace, Rand threw back the curtains on the room, letting in the morning light, then began to gently wash Tam's face. By the time the Gleeman returned, the blaze on the hearth was warming the room.
She will not come,
Tom Maryland announced as he stalked into the room. He glared at Rand, his bushy white brows drawing down sharply.
You didn't tell me she had seen him already. She almost took my head off.
I thought, I don't know, maybe the mayor could do something. Could make her see. Hands clenched in anxious fists, Rand turned from the fireplace to Bran. Master Alvear, what can I do? The rotund man shook his head helplessly. He laid a freshly dampened cloth on Tam's forehead and avoided meeting Rand's eye. I can't just watch him die, Master Alvear. I have to do something. The Gleeman shifted as if to speak. Rand rounded on him eagerly. Do you have an idea? I'll try anything.
I was just wondering,
Tom said, tamping his long-stemmed pipe with his thumb.
If the mayor knew who scrawled the dragon's fang on his door.
He peered into the bowl, then looked at Tam and replaced the unlit pipe between his teeth with a sigh.
Someone seems not to like him anymore. Maybe it's his guests they don't like.
Rand gave him a disgusted look and turned away to stare into the fire. His thoughts danced like the flames, and like the flames, they concentrated fixedly on one thing. He would not give up. He could not just stand there and watch Tam die. My father, he thought fiercely. My father. Once the fever was gone, that could be cleared up as well. But the fever first. Only how? Bran Alvear's mouth tightened as he looked at Rand's back, and the glare he directed at the Gleeman would have given a bear pause, but Tom just waited expectantly, as if he had not noticed it. It's probably the work of one of the Congers or a Coplin, the mayor said finally, though the light alone knows which. They're a large brood, and if there's ill to be said of someone, or even if there isn't, they'll say it. They make Sen Bui sound honey-tongued.
That wagon load who came in just before dawn?
The Gleeman asked.
They hadn't so much as smelled of Trolloc. And all they wanted to know was when festival was going to start, as if they couldn't see half the village in ashes.
Master Alvear nodded grimly. One branch of the family, but none of them are very different. That fool Darl Coplin spent half the night demanding us from Mistress Moraine. And the Master Lan out of the inn, out of the village.
Go!
As if there would be any village at all left without them. Rand had only half listened to the conversation, but this last tugged him to speak. What did they do? Why, she called ball lightning out of the clear night sky, Master Alvear replied. Sent it darting straight at the Trollocs. You've seen trees shattered by it. The Trollocs stood it no better. Moraine? Rand said incredulously, and the mayor nodded. Mistress Moraine. And Master Lan was a whirlwind with that sword of his. His sword? The man himself is a weapon, and in 10 places at once, or so it seemed. Burn me, but I still wouldn't believe it if I couldn't step outside and see. He rubbed a hand over his bald head. Winter night visits just beginning, our hands full of presents and honey cakes and our heads full of wine. Then the dogs snarling, and suddenly the two of them burst out of the inn, running through the village shouting about Trollocs. I thought they'd had too much wine. After all, Trollocs? Then, before anyone knew what was happening, those things were right in the streets with us, slashing at people with their swords, torching houses, howling to freeze a man's blood. He made a sound of disgust in his throat. We just ran like chickens with a fox in the hen yard till Master Lan put some backbone into us.
No need to be so hard, Tom said. You did as well as anyone could. Not every Trolloc lying out there fell to the two of them.
Yes, well, Master Alvear gave himself a shake. It's still almost too much to believe. I should die in Emmonsfield, and Master Lan is a warder.
Take down.
Rand whispered. She can't be. I talked to her. She doesn't. Did you think there were signs? The man said wryly. Aes Sedai painted across their backs.
Let's go!
And maybe danger, stay away. Suddenly he slapped his foot. Aes Sedai. I'm an old fool and losing my wits. There's a chance, Rand, if you're willing to do it. I can't tell you to do it, and I don't know if I'd have the nerve if it were me. Chance? Rand said. I'll take any chance and it'll help. Aes Sedai can heal, Rand. Burn me, lad, you've heard the stories. They can cure where medicines fail. Gleeman, you should have remembered that better than I. Gleeman's tales are full of Aes Sedai. Why didn't you speak up instead of letting me flail around?
I'm a stranger here,
Tom said, looking longingly at his unlit pipe.
And Goodman Coplin isn't the only one who wants nothing to do with Aes Sedai. Best the idea came from you.
An Aes Sedai, Rand muttered, trying to make the woman who had smiled at him fit the stories. Help from an Aes Sedai was sometimes worse than no help at all, so the stories said, like poison in a pie. And their gifts always had a hook in them, like fish bait. Suddenly the coin in his pocket, the coin Moraine had given him, seemed like a burning coal. It was all he could do not to rip it out of his coat and throw it out the window. Nobody wants to get involved with the Aes Sedai, lad, the mayor said slowly. It is the only chance I can see, but it's still no small decision. I cannot make it for you, but I have seen nothing but good from Mistress Moraine. Moraine Sedai, I should call her, I suppose. Sometimes, he gave a meaningful look at Tam. You have to take a chance, even if it's a poor one. Some of the stories are exaggerated in a way, Tom, as if the words are being dragged from him. Some of them. Besides, boy, what choice do you have? Rand sighed. Tam still had not moved a muscle. His eyes were sunken into the abyss of the weak. I'll go find them. The other side of the bridges, the guild said, where they are disposing of the dead Trollocs. But be careful, boy. Aes Sedai do what they do for reasons of their own, and they aren't always the reasons others think. The last was a shout that followed Rand to the door. He had to hold on to the sword hilt to keep the scabbard from tangling in his legs as he ran, but he would not take the time to remove it. He clattered down the stairs and dashed out of the inn, tiredness forgotten for the moment. The chance for Sam, however small, was enough to overcome a night without sleep, for a time at least. That the chance came from an Aes Sedai, or what the price of it might be, he did not want to consider. As for actually facing an Aes Sedai, he took a deep breath and tried to move faster. The bonfire stood well beyond the last houses to the north and the west side of the road to Watch Hill.
We'll stop here.
The wind still carried the oily black columns of smoke away from the village, but even so, a sickly sweet stink filled the air, like a roast left hours too long on the spit. Rand gagged at the smell, then swallowed hard when he realized its source. A fine thing to do with Beltane fires. The men tending the fires had cloths tied over their noses and mouths, but their grimaces made it plain the vinegar dampening the cloths was not enough. Even if it did kill the stench, they still knew the stench was there, and they still knew what they were doing. Two of the men were untying the harness straps of one of the big Durans from a Trolloc's ankles. Lan, squatting beside the body, had tossed back the blanket enough to reveal the Trolloc's shoulders and goat-snouted head. As Rand trotted up, the warder unfastened a metal badge, a blood-red enameled trident, from one spiked shoulder of the Trolloc's shirt of black mail. Kobold, he announced. He bounced the badge on his palm and snatched it out of the air with a growl. That makes 7 bands so far. Moraine, seated cross-legged on the ground a short distance off, shook her head tiredly. A walking staff covered from end to end in carved vines and flowers lay across her knees, and her dress had the rumpled look of having been worn too long. 7 bands. 7. That many have not acted together since the Trolloc Wars. Bad news piles on bad news. I'm afraid, Lan. I thought we had gained a march, but we may be further behind than ever. Rand stared at her, unable to speak. Aes Sedai. He'd been trying to convince himself that she would not look any different now that he knew what he was looking at. And to his surprise, she did not. She was no longer quite so pristine, not with wisps of her hair sticking out in all directions, and a faint streak of soot across her nose, yet not really different either. Surely there must be something about an Aes Sedai to mark her for what she was. On the other hand, if outward appearance reflected what was inside, if the stories were true, then she should look closer to a Trolloc than to a more than handsome woman whose dignity was not dented by sitting in the dirt. And she could help Tam. Whatever the cost, there was that before anything else. He took a deep breath. Mistress Moraine Sedai. Both turned to look at him, and he froze under her gaze. Not the calm, smiling gaze he remembered from the Green. Her face was tired, but her dark eyes were a hawk's eyes. Aes Sedai, breakers of the world, puppeteers who pulled strings and made thrones and nations dance in designs only the women from Tar Valon knew. A little more light in the darkness, the Aes Sedai murmured. She raised her voice. How are your dreams, Randolph Thorne? He stared at her. My dreams? A night like that can give a man bad dreams. If you have nightmares, you must tell me of it. I can help with bad dreams sometimes.
There's nothing wrong with my... It's my father. He's hurt. It's not much more than a scratch, but the fever is burning him up. Wisdom won't help. She says she can't. But the stories... She raised an eyebrow, and he stopped and swallowed hard. Right. Is there a story with an Aes Sedai where she isn't a villain? He looked at the warder, but Lan appeared more interested in the dead Trolloc than in anything Rand might say. Fumbling his way under her eyes, he went on. It said Aes Sedai. If you can help him, anything you can do for him, whatever the cost. I mean, he took a deep breath and finished up in a rush. I'll pay any price in my power if you help him. Anything. Any price? Moraine mused after herself. We will speak of prices later, Rand, if at all. I can make no promises. Your wisdom knows what she is about. I will do what I can, but it is beyond my power to stop the wheel from turning. Death comes sooner or later to everyone. The warder said, unless they serve the Dark One. And only fools are willing to pay that price. Moraine made a clucking sound. Do not be so
See your daddy now.
We have some reason to celebrate. A small one, but a reason. She used the staff to pull herself to her feet. Take me to your father, Rand. I will help him as much as I am able. Too many here have refused to let me help at all. They have heard the stories, too, she added dryly. He's at the inn, Rand said. This way. And thank you. Thank you. They followed, but his pace took him quickly ahead. He slowed impatiently for them to catch up, then darted ahead again and had to wait again. Please hurry, he urged, so caught up in actually getting help for Tam that he never considered the temerity of prodding an Aes Sedai. The fever is burning him up. Lan glared at him. Can't you see she's tired? Even with an Angreal, what she did last night was like running around the village with a sack of stones on her back. I don't know that you are worth it, sheepherder, no matter what she says. Lan held his tongue. Gently, my friend, Moraine said. Without slowing her pace, she reached up to pat the warder's shoulder. He towered over her protectively, as if he could give her strength just by being close. You think only of taking care of me. Must you not think the same of yourself? Lan scowled, but fell silent. I am coming as quickly as I can, I promise you. The fierceness of her eyes, or the calm of her voice, not gentle exactly, more firmly in command. Rand did not know which to believe. Or perhaps they did go together. Aes Sedai. He was committed now. He matched his stride to theirs and tried not to think of what the price might be that they would talk about later. Chapter 8. A place of safety. While he was still coming through the door, Rand's eyes went to his father. His father, no matter what anyone said. Tam had not moved an inch. His eyes were still shut, and his breath came in labored gasps, low and rasping. The white-haired gleeman cut off a conversation with the mayor, who was bent over the bed again, tending Tam. He gave Moraine an uneasy look. The Aes Sedai ignored him. Indeed, she ignored everyone except for Tam. But at him, she stared with an intent frown. Tom stuck his unlit pipe between his teeth, then snatched it out again and glowered at it. Man cannot even smoke in peace, he muttered. I'd better make sure some farmer doesn't steal my cloak. Keep this cow warm. At least I can have my pipe out there. He hurried out of the room. Lan stared after him, his angular face as expressionless as a rock. I do not like that man. There's something about him I don't trust. I did not see a hair of him last night. He was there, Rand said, watching Moraine uncertainly. He must have been. His cloak did not get singed in front of the fireplace. Rand did not care if the gleeman had spent the night hiding in the stable. My father, he said to Moraine pleadingly. Rand opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Moraine said, Leave me with him, Master Alvear. There is nothing you can do here now, except get in my way. For a minute, Bran hesitated, torn between dislike of being ordered about in his own inn and reluctance to disobey an Aes Sedai. Finally, he straightened up to clap Rand on the shoulder. Come along, boy. Let us leave Moraine Sedai to her.
Did you see that coming?
And there's plenty you can give me a hand with downstairs. Before you know it, Tam will be shouting for his pipe in a mug of ale. Can I stay? Rand spoke to Moraine, though she did not really seem to be aware of anyone besides Tam. Bran's hand tightened, but Rand ignored him. Please, I'll keep out of your way.
You won't even know I am here. He's my father, he added with a fierceness that startled him and widened the mayor's eyes in surprise. Rand hoped the others put it down to tiredness or the strain of dealing with an Aes Sedai. Yes, Moraine said impatiently. She had tossed her cloak and staff carelessly across the only chair in the room, and now she pushed up the sleeves of her gown, baring her arms to her elbows. Her attention never really left Tam, even while she spoke. Sit over there. And you too. Not bad! She gestured vaguely in the direction of a long bench against the wall. Her eyes traveled slowly from Tam's feet to his head, but Rand had the prickly feeling that she was looking beyond him in some fashion. You may talk if you wish, she went on absently, but do it quietly. Now you go, Master Alvier. This is a sick room, not a gathering hall. See that I am not disturbed. The mayor grumbled under his breath, though not loudly enough to catch her attention, of course, squeezed Rand's shoulder again, then obediently, if reluctantly, closed the door behind him.
Wow!
Muttering to herself, the Aes Sedai knelt beside the bed and rested her hands lightly on Tam's chest. She closed her eyes, and for a long time she neither moved nor made a sound.
Let's get this over with.
In the stories, Aes Sedai wonders were always accompanied by flashes and thunderclaps or other signs that indicate mighty works and great powers. The power. The one power. Drawn from the true source that drove the wheel of time. That was not something Rand wanted to think about. The power involved with Tam. Himself in the same room where the power might be used. In the same village was bad enough. For all he could tell, though, Moraine might just as well have gone to sleep. But he thought Tam's breathing sounded easier. She must be doing something. So intent was he that he jumped when Lan spoke softly. That is a fine weapon you wear. Like Heron on the blade as well.
Thanks, Vanille!
For a moment, Rand stared at the warder, not grasping what it was he was talking about. He had completely forgotten Tam's sword and the lather of dealing with an Aes Sedai. It did not seem so heavy anymore. Yes, there is. What is she doing? I'd not have thought to find a Heron-marked sword in a place like this, Lan said. It belongs to my father. He glanced at Lan's sword, the hilt just visible at the edge of his cloak. The two swords did look a good deal alike, except that no Heron showed on the warder. He swung his eyes back to the bench. Tam's breathing did sound easier. The rasp was gone. He was sure of it. He bought it a long time ago. Strange Rand spared a sidelong look for Lan. For a stranger to wonder about the sword was fine. For a warder to do it. Still, he felt he had to say something. He never had any use for it that I know of. He said it had no use. Until last night, anyway. I didn't even know he had it till then. He called it useless, did he? He must not always have thought so. Lan touched the scabbard of Rand's waist briefly with one finger. There are places where the Heron is a symbol of the master swordsman. That blade must have traveled a strange road to end up with a sheep herder in the Two Rivers. Rand ignored the unspoken question. Moraine still had not moved. Was the Aes Sedai doing anything? He shivered, rubbed his arms, not sure he really wanted to know what she was doing. Aes Sedai. A question of his own popped into his head then. One he did not want to ask, one he needed an answer to. The mayor cleared his throat and took a deep breath. The mayor said the only reason there's anything left of the village is because of you. He made himself look at the warder. If you had been told about a man in the woods, a man who made people afraid just by looking at them, would that have warned you? A man whose horse doesn't make any noise, and the wind doesn't touch his cloak? Would you have known what was going to happen? Could you and Moraine Sedai have stopped it if you'd known about him? Not without half a dozen of my sisters, Moraine said, and Rand started. She still knelt by the bed, but she had taken her hands from Tam and half turned to face the two of them on the bench. Her voice never raised, but her eyes pinned Rand to the wall. Had I known when I left Tar Valon that I would find Trollocs and Myrddraal here,
Guess running's out of the
I
question.
would have brought half a dozen of them. A dozen. If I had to drag them by the scruffs of their necks. By myself, a month's warning would have made little difference. Perhaps none. There is only so much one person can do, even calling one power. And there were probably well over 100 Trollocs scattered around this district last night. An entire fist. It would still have been good to know, Lan said sharply, the sharpness directed at Rand. When did you see him, exactly? And where? That's of no consequence now, Moraine said. I will not have the boy thinking he is to blame for something when he is not. I am as much to blame. That accursed raven yesterday, the way it behaved, should have warned me. And you too, my old friend. Tom clicked angrily.
You should see your daddy
I
now.
was overconfident to the point of arrogance, sure that the Dark One's touch could not have spread so far, nor so heavily, not yet. So sure. Rand blinked. The raven? I don't understand. Carrion eaters. Lan's mouth twisted in distaste. The Dark One's minions often find spies among creatures that feed on death. Ravens and crows mainly. Rats in the cities sometimes. A quick shiver ran through Rand. Ravens and crows as spies of the Dark One? There were ravens and crows everywhere now. The Dark One's touch, Moraine had said. The Dark One was always there, he knew that. But if you tried to walk in the light, tried to live a good life, and did not name him, he could not harm you. That was what everybody believed, what everybody learned with his mother's milk. But Moraine seemed to be saying... His glance fell on Tam, and everything else was pushed right out of his head. His father's face was noticeably less flushed than it had been, and his breathing sounded almost normal. Rand would have leaped up if Lan had not caught his arm. Moraine shook her head and sighed. Not yet. I hope it is only not yet. Trollic weapons are made of forges in a valley called Nakandar, on the very slopes of Shale Ghul itself. Some of them take a taint from that place, a stain of evil in the metal. Those tainted blades make wounds that will not heal unhealed, or cause strange sicknesses that medicines cannot touch.
Vanille!
Your father's key.
Follow the old man's lead.
Taint is still in him. Left alone, it will
Thanks,
grow again
Vanille.
and consume him.
Watch
So
your
she
learn,
won't leave
kid.
it alone. Rand's words were half free, half command. He was shocked to realize he had spoken to an Aes Sedai like that, but she seemed not to notice his tone. I will not, he agreed simply. I'm very tired, Rand. But
Wisdom
I've had no
does
chance
come
to
with
rest
age.
since last night. Ordinarily, it would not matter, but for this kind of hurt... This, she took a small bundle of white silk from her pouch, is an Angreal. She saw his expression. You know of Angreal, then? Good. Unconsciously, he leaned back further away from her and what she held. A few stories mentioned Angreal, those relics of the Age of Legends that Aes Sedai used to perform their greatest wonders.
Time to get serious.
He was startled to see her unwrap a smooth ivory figurine, age-darkened. No longer than her hand, it was a woman in flowing robes, with long hair falling about her shoulders. We have lost the making of these, she said. So much is lost, perhaps never to be found again. So few remain. The Amerlin seat almost did not allow me to take this one. It is well for Ellen's field and for your father that you did give her permission. But you must not hope too much. Now you know that I can do little more than I could have without it yesterday. The taint is strong. It has had time to fester. You can help him, Rand said fervently.
Old man
I know
still
you can. Moraine smiled, a bare curving of her lips. We shall see. Then she turned back to Tam. One hand she laid on his forehead. The other cupped the ivory figure. Eyes closed, her face took on a look of concentration. She scarcely seemed to breathe. That rider you spoke of, Lan said quietly. The one who made you afraid. That was surely a Myrddraal. A Myrddraal? Lan exclaimed. With fades at 20 feet tall and... The words faded away under the warder's mirthless grin. Sometimes, sheepherder, stories make things larger than truth. Believe me, the truth is big enough with a half-man. Half-man, lurk, fade, shadow man. The name depends on the land you're in, but they all mean Myrddraal. Fades are Trollocs' spawn. Throwbacks almost to the human stock the Dreadlords used to make the Trollocs. Almost. But if the human strain is made stronger, so is the taint that twists the Trollocs. Half-men have powers of a kind, the sort that stem from the Dark One. Only the weakest Aes Sedai would fail to be a match for a Fade, 1 against 1. But many a good man and true has fallen to them. Since the wars that ended the Age of Legends, since the Forsaken were bound, They have been the brain that tells the Trolloc fists where to strike. In the days of the Trolloc Wars, Halfman led the Trollocs in battle, under the Dreadlords. He scared me, Rand said faintly. He just looked at me and... he shivered. No need for shame, sheepherder. They scare me too. I've seen men who have been soldiers all their lives freeze like a bird facing a snake
Time to
when they
get
confront a
serious.
man. In the north, in the borderlands along the Great Blight, there is a saying. The look of the eyeless is fear. Rand said, Rand nodded. Murderers see like eagles in darkness or in light. They have no eyes. I think a few things more dangerous than facing a murderer. Moraine Sedai and I both tried to kill the one that was here last night. We failed every time. Halfmen have the Dark One's own luck. Rand swallowed. Trolloc said the murderer wanted to talk to me. I didn't know what it meant. Rand's
I'm
head
tougher
perked up.
than you thought,
His
huh?
eyes were blue stones. You talked to a Trolloc? Not exactly, Rand stammered. The warder's gaze held him like a trap. It talked to me. It said it wouldn't hurt me, that the murderer wanted to talk to me. Then it tried to kill me.
Let's
He licked
get
his
this
lips and
over
rubbed
with.
his hand along the knobby leather of the sword hilt. In short, choppy sentences, he explained about returning to the farmhouse. I killed it instead, he finished. By accident, really. He jumped at me and I had the sword in my hand. Rand's face softened slightly, if rock to be said to soften. Even so, there was something to speak of, sheepherder. Until last night, there were few men south of the borderlands who could say they had seen a Trolloc, much less killed one. And fewer still who have slain a Trolloc alone and unaided. Moraine said wearily. It is done. Land, help me out. The warder sprang to his side, but he was no quicker than Rand darting to the bank. Tam's skin was cool to the touch, though his face had a pale, washed-out look, as if he had spent far too long out of the sun. His eyes were still closed, but he drew the deep breaths of normal sleep. He will be all right now? Rand asked anxiously. With rest, yes, Moraine said. A few weeks in bed, and he will be as good as ever. She walked unsteadily, despite holding Land's arm. He swept her cloak and staff from the chair cushion for her to sit, and she eased herself down with a sigh. With a slow care, she rewrapped the Ambrial, returned it to her pouch. Rand's shoulders shook. He bit his lip to keep from laughing. At the same time, he had to scrub a hand across his eyes to clear away tears. Here's your blessings, Moraine went on. Some eyes Sedai, which ban life and health to burn. Only the smallest spark remains. Those days are gone, though. Perhaps forever. So much was lost. Not just the making of Ambrial. So much that could be done which we dare not even dream of, if we remember it at all. There are far fewer of us now. Some talents are all but gone, and many that remain seem weaker. Now there must be both will and strength for the body strong. And even the strongest of us can do nothing in the way of healing. It is fortunate that your father is a strong man, both in body and spirit. As it is, he used up much of his strength in the fight for life. But all that is left now is for him to recuperate. That will take time, but the taint is gone. I can never repay you, he told her without taking his eyes from Tam. But anything I can do for you, I will. Anything at all. He remembered the talk of prices then, and his promise. Kneeling beside Tam, he meant it even more than before. But it still was not
Time to
easy
get
to look
serious.
at her. Anything. As long as it does not hurt the village in my forest. Moraine raised a hand dismissively. If you think it is necessary, I would like to talk with you anyway. No doubt leave at the same time we do, and we can speak at length then. Leave? He exclaimed, scrambling to his feet. Is it really that bad? Everyone looked to me as if they were ready to start rebuilding. We are pretty settled folk in the Two Rivers. Nobody ever leaves. And where would we go? Adan Thane said the weather is just as bad everywhere else. He was the peddler. The Trollocs. Rand swallowed, wishing Tom Maryland had not told him what Trollocs ate. The best I can see to do is stay right here where we belong, in the Two Rivers, and put things back together. We have crops in the ground, and it has to warm enough for the shearing soon. I don't know who started this talk about leaving. One of the Coplans, I'll bet. But whoever it was... Sheepherder, Lan broke in. You talk when you should be listening. He blinked at both of them. He had been half babbling, he realized, and he had rambled on while she tried to talk. While Isaac and I tried to talk. He wondered what to say, how to apologize, but Moraine smiled while he was still thinking. I understand how you feel, Rand, she said, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that she really did. Think no more of it. Her mouth tightened, and she shook her head. I have handled this badly, I see. I should have rested first, I suppose. It is you who will be leaving, Rand. You who must leave for the sake of your village. Me? He cleared his throat and tried again. Me? It sounded a little better this time. Why do I have to go? I don't understand any of this. I don't want to go anywhere. Moraine looked at Lan, and the warder unfolded his arms. He looked at Rand from under his leather headband, and Rand had the feeling of being weighed on invisible scales again. Did you know, Lan said suddenly, that some homes were not attacked? Half the village is in ashes, he protested, but the warder waved it away. Some houses were only torched to create confusion. The Trollocs ignored them afterwards, and the people who fled from them as well. Unless they actually got in the way of the true attack. Most of the people who come in from the outlying farms never saw a hair of a Trolloc, and that only at a distance. Most never knew there was any trouble until they saw the village. I did hear about Donald Copland, Rand said slowly. I suppose it just didn't sink in. 2 farms were attacked, Lan went on. Yours and one other. Because of Beltane, everyone who lived at the second farm was already in the village. Many people were saved because Murdrol was ignorant of Two Rivers customs. The festival in Winternight made its task all but impossible, but it did not know that. Rand looked at Moraine, leaning back in the chair. She said nothing. He watched him, finger laid across the lips. Our farm and who else's? He asked finally. The Aybara farm, Rand replied. Here in Emmonsfield, they struck first at the forge, and the blacksmith's house, and Master Cawthon's house. Rand's mouth was suddenly dry. That's crazy, he managed to get out, then jumped as Moraine straightened. Not crazy, Rand, she said. Purposeful. The Trollocs did not come to Emmonsfield by happenstance, and they did not do what they did for the pleasure of killing and burning, however much that delighted them. They knew what, or rather, who
Let's get this over
they
with.
were after. The Trollocs came to kill or capture young men of a certain age who lived near Emmonsfield.
Atta girl.
My age? Rand's voice shook. He did not care. Right. Matt? What about parents? Moraine assured him. The trifle sooty. Van Craw and them things? Whenever in any danger, Lan said.
I'm tougher
At
than
least,
you thought,
no
huh?
more than anyone else. But they saw the rider, the Fade, too. And they're the same age as I am. Master Craw's house was not even damaged, Moraine said. And the miller and his family slept through half the attack before the noise woke them. Van is 10 months older than you, and Lem 8 months younger. She smiled dryly at his surprise. I told you I asked questions. But I also said young men of a certain age. You and your 2 friends are within weeks of one another. It was you 3, the Murdrol fought. Rand shifted uneasily, wishing she would not look at him like that. Her eyes could pierce his brain and read what lay in every corner. What would they want with us? We're just farmers, shepherds. That is a question, Rand. He said quietly. But the answer is important. Trollocs, for they have not been seen in almost 2,000 years, tells us that much. Lots of stories tell about Trolloc raids, Rand said stubbornly. We just never had one here before. Warded by Trollocs all the time. Rand smiled. Boy, I expect to fight Trollocs along the Great Blight, but not here. Nearly 600 leagues to the south.
You got
That
this,
was as hot a
Vanille.
raid last night as I'd expect to see in Shinar, or any of the borderlands. In one of you, he said, or all 3. There is something the Dark One fears. That's impossible. Rand stumbled to the window and stared out at the village, at the people working among the ruins. I don't care what's happening. That is just impossible. Something on the green caught his eye. He stared, then realized it was the blackened stump of the spring pole. A sign fell time to Petter and Gleeman, not strangers. He shivered and shook his head violently.
Wisdom does come with age.
No, I'm a shepherd. The Dark One can't be interested in me. It took a great deal of effort, Lan said grimly, to bring so many Trollocs so far without raising a hue and cry from the borderlands to Caemlyn and beyond. Wish I knew how they did it. Do you really believe they went to all that bother just to burn a few houses? They will be back, Moraine added. Rand had his mouth open to argue with Lan, but that brought him up short. He spun to face her. Back? Can't you stop them? You did last night and you were surprised then. Now you know they are here. Perhaps, Moraine replied. I could send to Tar Valon for some of my sisters. They might have time to make the journey before we need them. The Myrddraal knows I am here too, and it probably will not attack, not openly at least, lacking reinforcements. More Myrddraal and more Trollocs. With enough Aes Sedai and enough warders, the Trollocs can be beaten off, though I cannot say how many battles it will take. A vision danced in his head of Emond's Field all in ashes. All the farms burned, and Watch Hill and Devon Ride and Tarrant Ferry. All ashes and blood. No, he said, and felt a wrenching inside, as if he had lost his grip on something. That's why I have to leave, isn't it? The Trollocs won't come back if I am not here. The last trace of obstinacy made him add, if they really are after me. Moraine's eyebrows raised as if she were surprised that he was not convinced, but Lan said, are you willing to bet your village on it, sheep herder? Your whole 2 rivers? Rand's stubbornness faded.
Let's get this over with.
He said again, and felt that emptiness inside again, too. Karen and Matt have to go too, don't they?
Did you see that coming?
Leaving the 2 rivers. Leaving his home and his father. At least Tam would get better. At least he would be able to hear him say all that on the quarry road had been nonsense. We could go to Baerlon, I suppose. Or even Caemlyn. I've heard there are more people in Caemlyn than in the whole 2 rivers. We'd be safe there. He tried out a laugh that sounded hollow. I used to daydream about seeing Caemlyn. I never thought it would come about like this. There was a long silence, then Lan said, I would not count on Caemlyn for safety. If the Myrddraal want you badly enough, they will find a way. Walls are a poor bar to a half-man. You would be a fool not to believe they want you very badly indeed. Rand thought his spirits had sunk as low as they possibly could, but at that, they slid deeper.
Did you see that coming?
And Rand's ears pricked up. In Tar Valon, he would be among Aes Sedai and warders. Even during the Trolloc Wars, the forces of the Dark One feared to attack the Shining Walls. The one attempt was their greatest defeat until the very end. And Tar Valon holds all the knowledge we Aes Sedai have gathered since the time of madness. Some fragments even date from the Age of Legends. In Tar Valon, if anywhere, you will be able to learn why the Myrddraal want you. Why the Father of Lies wants you. That I can promise. A journey all the way to Tar Valon was almost beyond thinking. A journey to a place where he would be surrounded by Aes Sedai. Of course, Moraine had healed Tam, or it looked as if she had at least. But there were all those stories. It was uncomfortable enough to be in a room with one Aes Sedai, but to be in a city full of them? And she still had not demanded her price. There was always a price, so the stories said. How long will my father take? He asked at last. Right. I have to tell him. He shouldn't just wake and find me gone. He thought he heard Lan give a sign. He looked at the water curiously. The man's face was as expressionless as ever. It is unlikely he will wake before we get home. I need to go soon after full dusk. Even a single day of delay could be fatal. It will be best if you leave in the morning. In the night? Rand said down. Lan nodded. The halfmen will discover we are gone soon enough. There is no need to make things any easier for us than we must. Rand Ryan fussed with his father's blankets. It was a very long way to Todd.
The old man still got it.
In that case, I'd better go find Matt and Perrin. I will attend to that. Moraine got to her feet briskly and donned her cloak with suddenly restored vigor. She put a hand on his shoulder, and he tried very hard not to flinch. She did not press hard, but it was an iron grip that held him as surely as a forked stick held a snake. It will be best if we keep all of this. The same one who put the dragon's fang on the inn door might make trouble if they knew. He drew a relieved breath when she took her hand away.
Yes!
I will have Mistress Alvear bring you something to eat. She went on, just as if she had not noticed his reaction. Then you need to sleep. It will be a hard journey tonight, even if you are rested. The door closed behind them. Rand stood looking down at Tam. Looking at Tam, but seeing nothing. Not until that very minute had he realized that Emmons Field was a part of him as much as he was a part of it. He realized it now because he knew that was what he had felt falling loose. He was apart from the village now. The Shepherd of the Night wanted him. It was impossible. He was only a farmer. But the Trollocs had come. Lan was right about one thing. He could not risk the village on the chance that Moraine was wrong. He could not even tell him.
We got this, Vanille.
The Coplans really would make trouble about something like that. And to trust in Aes Sedai. Don't wake me now, Mr. Alvear said, as the mayor shut the door behind his wife and himself. The cloth-covered tray she carried gave out delicious warm smell. She set it on the chest against the wall, then firmly moved Rand away from the bed. She said softly. And it does not include you falling on top of him from exhaustion. I've brought you a bite to eat. Don't let it get cold now.
I wish you wouldn't call her that,
Rand said peevishly.
Moraine Sedai is proper. She might get mad.
Mistress Alvear gave him a pat on the cheek. You just leave me to worry about that. Me and I had a long talk. And keep your voice down. If you wake Tam, you'll have to answer to me and Moraine Sedai. She put an emphasis on Moraine's title that made Rand insistent to improve it. The two of you keep out of my way. With a fond smile for her husband, she turned to the bed and Master Alvear gave Rand a frustrated look. She's an Aes Sedai. Half the women in the village act as if she sits in a women's circle, and the rest as if she were a Trolloc. Not a one of them seems to realize you have to be careful around Aes Sedai. The men may keep looking at her sideways, but at least they aren't doing anything that might provoke her. Careful, Miss Thorne. It was not too late to start being careful. Master Alvear, he said slowly, do you know how many farms were attacked? Only two that I've heard of so far, including your place. The mayor paused, frowning and shrugged.
It doesn't seem enough for what happened here. I should be glad of it. Well, we'll probably hear of more before the day is out.
Rand sighed. No need to ask for the farm. Here in the village, did they... I mean, was there anything to show what they were after?
After, boy? I don't know that they were after anything except maybe killing us all. It was just the way I said. The dogs barking, and Moraine Sedai and Lan running through the streets.
Wisdom
And somebody
does
shouted
come
that
with
Master
age.
Luhan's house and the forge were on fire. Abu Cawthan's house flared up. Odd that, it's nearly in the middle of the village. Anyway, the next thing the Trollocs were all among us. No, I don't think they were after anything.
He gave an abrupt bark of a laugh and cut it short with a wary look at his wife. She did not look around from Tam. To tell the truth,
Let's get this
she went
over
on
with.
quietly. They seemed almost as confused as we were.
Did you see that coming?
Or a war. I suppose not, Rand said, grimacing. If Moraine had told the truth about that, she probably had told the truth about the rest, too. For a moment, she thought about asking the mayor's advice, but Master Alvear obviously knew little more about Aes Sedai than anyone else would. Besides, he was reluctant to tell even the mayor what was going on, what Moraine said was going on. He was not sure if he was more afraid of being laughed at, or being believed. He rubbed a thumb against the hilt of Tam. His father had been out into the world. He must know more about Aes Sedai than the mayor did. But if Tam really had been out into the river, then maybe what he
Wisdom
had said in
does
the
come
West
with
was.
age.
He scrubbed both his hands through his hair, scattering that line of thought. You need sleep, lad, the mayor said. Yes, you do, Mistress Alvear added. You're almost falling down where you stand. Rand blinked at her in surprise. He had not even realized she had left his father. He did need sleep. Just the thought set off a yawn. You can take the bed in the next room, the mayor said. There's already a fire laid. Rand looked at his father. Tam was still deep in sleep, and that made him yawn again. I'd rather stay in here if you don't mind, for when he wakes up. Sick room matters were in Mistress Alvear's province, and the mayor left it to her. She hesitated only a moment before nodding. But you let him wake on his own. If you bother his sleep. He tried to say he would do as she ordered, but the words got tangled in yet another yawn. She shook her head with a smile. You will be asleep yourself in no time at all. If you must stay, curl up next to the fire, and drink a little of that beef broth before you doze off. I will, Rand said. He would have agreed to anything that kept him in that room. And I won't wake him. See that you do not, Mistress Alvear told him firmly, but not in an unkindly way. I'll bring you up a pillow and some blankets. When the door finally closed behind them, Rand dragged the lone chair in the room over beside the bed and sat down where he could watch Tam. It was all very well for Mistress Alvear to talk about sleep. His jaws cracked as he stifled a yawn. But he could not sleep yet. Tam might wake at any time, and maybe only stay awake a short while. Rand had to be waiting when he did. He grimaced and twisted in the chair, absently shifting the sword hilt out of his ribs. He still felt awkward about telling anyone what Moraine had said. But this was Tam, after all. This was... Without realizing it, he set his jaw determinedly. My father. I can tell my father anything. He twisted a little more in the chair and put his head against the chair back. Tam was his father, and nobody could tell him what to say or not say to his father. He just had to stay awake until Tam woke up. He just had to... Chapter 9. Tellings of the Wheel. Rand's heart pounded as he ran, and he stared in dismay at the barren hills surrounding him. This was not just a place where spring was late in coming. Spring had never come here, and never would come. Nothing grew in the cold soil that crunched under his boots, not so much as a bit of lichen. He scrambled past boulders twice as tall as he was. Dust coated the stone, as if never a drop of rain had touched it. The sun was a swollen, blood-red ball, more fiery than on the hottest day of summer, and bright enough to sear his eyes. But it stood dark against a leaden cauldron of a sky where clouds of sharp black and silver roiled and boiled on every horizon. For all the swirling clouds, though, no breath of breeze stirred across the land, and despite the sullen sun, the air burned cold like the depth of winter. Rand looked over his shoulder often as he ran, but he could not see his pursuers. Only desolate hills and jagged black mountains, many topped by tall plumes of dark smoke rising to join the milling clouds. If he could not see his hunters, though, he could hear them, howling behind him, guttural voices shouting with the glee of the chase, howling with the joy of blood to come. Trollocs, coming closer, and his strength was almost gone. With desperate haste, he scrambled to the top of a knife-edged ridge, then dropped to his knees with a groan. Below him, a sheer rock wall fell away, 1,000-foot cliff plummeting into a vast canyon. Steamy mists covered the canyon floor, their thick gray surface rolling in grim waves, rolling and breaking against the cliff beneath him, but more slowly than any ocean wave had ever moved. Patches of fog glowed red for an instant, as if great fires had suddenly flared beneath, then died. Thunder rumbled in the depths of the valley, and lightning crackled through the gray, sometimes striking up at the sky. It was not the valley itself that sapped his strength and filled the empty spaces left with helplessness. From the center of the furious vapors, a mountain thrust upward. A mountain taller than any he had ever seen in the mountains of mist. A mountain as black as the loss of all hope. That bleak stone spire, a dagger stabbing at the heavens, was the source of his desolation. He had never seen it before, but he knew it. The memory of it flashed away like quicksilver when he tried to touch it, but the memory was there. He knew it was there. Unseen fingers touched